The first night I heard it, I thought I was dreaming. A car idling outside room 12. Engine rumbling low, headlights off. My clock read 2:47 a.m., and the sound was wrong for a quiet stretch of highway like this. It wasn't a passing truck or someone turning around. It was patient, waiting. When I peeked through the blinds, I saw nothing but wet tire tracks glistening in the dim security light. By the time I'd worked up the nerve to step outside, the car was gone, leaving the smell of exhaust and rain behind. That was the first night. The second night, it came back. I'm not a thrill chaser. I'm not even a night owl by choice. But when a buddy of mine told me about a property watch job, just sitting nights in an abandoned roadside motel to keep vandals out, it sounded like the easiest paycheck I'd ever earned. The place had been shuttered for years. Faded vacancy sign, broken neon, paint peeling from the office door. The owner had plans to flip it into apartments, but permits were slow and squatters had been breaking in. My job was simple. Be there from midnight to 6, keep the lights on in the office, and call the sheriff if anyone showed up. No cameras, no alarm, just me, a space heater, and the hum of an ancient soda machine in the corner. For the first week, nothing happened. No drunks looking for a room. No kids daring each other to break a window. Just whine through the cracked siding and the occasional semi growling past on the highway. I bring a thermos of coffee, a book, and sometimes my laptop to pass the time. Then came that first night with the idling car. By the third night, I was ready. I kept my jacket on and my flashlight in my hand. Right on schedule, 2:47 a.m., I heard the low hum of an engine, so faint I almost missed it. I stepped out of the office, keeping to the shadows, and saw them. Fresh, wet tracks, ending at the cracked curb outside room 12. No car in sight. No taillights on the highway. It made no sense. Room 12's door hung half open, a rusted hinge groaning in the wind. The room had been stripped bare months ago, just a warped mattress and moldy carpet, but something about that dark gap made me uneasy. I shoved the door the rest of the way open. That's when I noticed the peephole drilled through the drywall. Not in the door, but in the wall itself. It was at waist height, facing the highway. I crouched and peered through. The view lined up perfectly with the on-ramp down the road. Whoever used this room had been watching cars long before I arrived. Back in the office, I dug through the cluttered desk drawers, looking for any sign of who might have used the room last. Beneath a pile of old receipts and empty matchbooks, I found something that didn't belong, a crumpled, water-stained flyer. It had a phone number, my phone number. I froze. The flyer was old, years old. The ink had bled from rain, but the message was still readable. Late arrival, call to arrange room drop-off. It was dated from when the motel was still operating, but the number hadn't changed. Whoever had that car, they weren't just here by chance. They were answering a signal that still existed, even if the motel didn't. The next night, I decided to test it. I left room 12's door wide open and turned off the office lights. I sat in the dark, phone on the desk in front of me. At exactly 2:47 a.m., the screen lit up. Incoming call. The number was blocked. I let it ring twice before answering. A male voice, calm, low, said, "You ready?" My mouth went dry. Ready for what? There was a pause. A long one. Then the click of the line going dead. From that night on, the game changed. I'd hear footsteps on the gravel outside, slow, deliberate. Shadows moved past the office window. Sometimes the phone would ring once, then stop like they were checking to see if I was still there. I started keeping a wrench under the desk. Then one night, the office phone rang again, but this time it didn't show blocked. It showed a local number. When I answered, a woman's voice said, "You're not him." Before I could speak, she added, "He'll come looking." The line went dead. I started sleeping in my car during the day, the motel giving me a feeling I couldn't shake, like I was standing in for someone who'd vanished, and whoever was showing up didn't care about the difference. 2 nights later, room 12's door wasn't just open. It was off its hinges entirely. In the center of the floor sat a burner phone, screen glowing with a single message. "Call me." I didn't. Instead, I left the keys on the desk, walked out to my car, and didn't look back until the motel was nothing but a shadow in the rear view. A week later, I saw a news clip. A traffic stop on the highway near the motel had turned up a trunk full of unmarked packages and an address book with numbers tied to old motel drop points. Room 12's address was on the list. So was my number. And now, every time my phone buzzes late at night, even from a friend, I get that same cold feeling in my gut. Like if I answer, I'll hear that voice again. And maybe this time they won't hang up. I knew I shouldn't have opened the door to the psych wing. The hinges gave way with a slow, groaning scream, and a wave of stale air rolled out, thick with mildew, rust, and something metallic underneath. My flashlight beam cut through the dark and hit peeling green paint, rusted gurneys, and a water-stained ceiling sagging like old skin. Somewhere deeper inside, a faint metallic clink echoed, followed by the whisper of movement. The hospital had been dead for years. Nothing should have been moving in there. I'm not proud of my curiosity, but it's what pays my rent. I work freelance for antique dealers and architectural salvage companies. My job is to go into places scheduled for demolition and tag anything worth selling. Old fixtures, hardware, doors, cabinets, gurneys, signage. Sometimes it's a quick in and out in a half-collapsed farmhouse. Other times, like with the old Greystone Regional Hospital, it's weeks of picking through the bones of a building the size of a city block. Greystone was a relic from another era. Red brick, arched windows, wards arranged in wings that spread like arms. The main hospital had been shut down in the early 2000s after funding dried up, but the psych wing had been sealed years before that. The stories about why varied. Some said asbestos, others said a lawsuit over patient treatment. Either way, when I signed my contract with the salvage company, the site manager made one thing clear. Don't go in there. Floors are bad. No one's been inside in decades. If you fall, no one's finding you. For a week, I stuck to the rules. My job was in the main building, removing doorknobs, brass bed frames, porcelain sinks. But then a collector called my boss with a special request, a vintage hydrotherapy gurney from the 1960s. The only one left on the property was rumored to be in the psych wing. That's how I found myself standing at the door I wasn't supposed to open. The lock had been cut years ago, probably by some bored teenagers or urban explorers. The door itself stuck to the frame, the wood swollen with damp, but it gave way under steady pressure. My flashlight revealed a corridor lined with patient rooms, doors hanging ajar like loose teeth. The linoleum was bubbled and split, and the air felt heavier the farther I stepped in. Halfway down the corridor, my phone buzzed. I almost dropped it, thinking it was a text, but the screen showed a notification I didn't understand. Movement detected East Ward. That was impossible. The hospital didn't have an active security system anymore. I swiped it away, assuming it was some leftover app update from a previous job. But as I moved on, the phone buzzed again, this time with a live camera feed, grainy, low-light footage of a corridor that looked just like the one I was in. Only in the feed, there was someone standing at the far end. The figure was small, hunched, wearing a hooded coat. They didn't move for several seconds, and I wondered if it was a glitch. Then they turned slowly and walked out of frame. My pulse spiked. There were supposed to be no workers in the psych wing. I told myself it had to be an old video file playing by mistake. I switched off the feed and shoved the phone in my pocket. The clink came again from somewhere ahead, metal on tile. I crept forward, my boots crunching on debris. The corridor widened into a large room with rows of broken wheelchairs. In the center was a metal crash cart, drawers half open and labels peeling. Most were empty, but a few still held ancient, rusted tools. A heavy-duty lock kept the bottom drawer sealed. Behind it, a door led to the hydrotherapy room. The gurney was there, just like I'd been told, steel frame, cracked leather padding, straps dangling from the sides. It was heavier than I expected, and moving it alone was going to be a nightmare. I gave a push to see how the wheels rolled. They squealed like an animal in pain. That's when I heard the camera click. I froze. Slowly, I turned toward the doorway. The figure from the feed was standing just inside the room, holding something small and black. A camera, its lens reflecting my flashlight. Their face was hidden under the hood, but I could see their breath in the beam of light. "You shouldn't be here," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They didn't answer. Instead, they raised the camera, snapped another photo, and then stepped back into the hall. I followed, but the corridor was empty. The only sound was the faint hiss of water dripping somewhere far away. I thought about calling security, but I knew the site's security was just a guy in a truck who checked the fence twice a night. If someone had gotten inside, they could come and go without being seen. I went back to the gurney, deciding to haul it to the main hall now and sort out the mystery later. But the moment I reached for it, my phone buzzed again. Another movement notification. Another live feed. This time, it was a view from above, looking down into the hydrotherapy room. I saw myself standing next to the gurney and the hooded figure crouched behind it. I spun around. The room was empty. The gurney hadn't moved, but now one of the leather straps was fastened to the side rail, looped tight as if someone had just tested it. I didn't waste time after that. I left the gurney, backed out of the room, and made my way toward the main door. My boots echoed too loudly in the corridor, and every shadow looked like it was ready to peel off the wall. Halfway back, I saw something I hadn't noticed before. A length of coaxial cable running along the ceiling, fresh and dust-free, feeding in one of the old dome cameras. Someone had wired it to a car battery sitting in an open closet. By the time I reached the door to the main hospital, my hands were shaking. I shoved it open and stepped into the light spilling from the salvage area. The door closed behind me with a solid thud. Later, when I told my boss what happened, he didn't believe me. Said I'd probably spooked myself in the dark and mistaken old junk for something sinister. But I couldn't stop thinking about that live feed, how the angle was impossible unless the camera was mounted high in the corner of the room, and how it showed me in real time, with someone close enough to touch me. I never went back into the psych wing, and every so often, my phone buzzes with a notification I can't explain. Movement detected, eastward, no matter how many times I delete the app. The projector was already running when I got there. No film, no reel, just a blank white light streaming onto the torn screen of Cinema 5. Rows of plastic-covered seats faced forward like an audience frozen in anticipation. And at the back of the room, a camera on a tripod was pointed at them, recording. I'd come to the abandoned Mapleview Mall to scavenge. I flip vintage electronics for a living. Old VHS decks, turntables, speaker systems. And malls like this are gold mines if you know where to look. The multiplex was my main target. Projection booths sometimes still held forgotten gear, and even the stripped ones had lenses, reels, or rare signage worth something. The mall had been shut down for years after a fire damaged part of the food court. Vandals had taken the obvious stuff, but places with multiple locked doors often hid pockets the scrappers hadn't gotten to yet. I slipped in through a delivery bay, crossed the dark concourse, and found the multiplex entrance. The carpet squished under my boots, reeking faintly of mold. Every theater door was propped open, their numbers dulled with dust, except for Cinema 5. That one was ajar, just enough to spill a thin wedge of light into the hall. I figured maybe sunlight was coming in through a back exit or hole in the roof. But when I stepped inside, my eyes adjusted to see the source. A projector running from the booth, blasting a solid white frame onto the screen. The odd part was the seats. They were all covered in plastic sheeting, each chair's shape outlined beneath the clear film. On the headrest of each was duct-taped cardboard with a large number written in marker. And at the back, in the aisle by the last row, a video camera sat on a tripod, lens aimed at the audience. Not the screen, the audience. I stood there listening. The only sound was the faint electrical hum from the projector. I moved down the aisle, careful not to rustle the plastic. Up close, the number cards looked official. The numbers weren't random. They were sequential, starting from the aisle seat in row 1, counting upward. 48 seats in all. Something crunched under my boot. I looked down and saw a strip of gaffer's tape with a name written on it. Howard, seat 37. A chill crawled up my spine. I headed for the projection booth to see who, or what, was running the machine. The door at the back of the theater was unlocked. I climbed the narrow stairs and stepped into the booth. No one there. A portable inverter sat on the floor, powering the projector. Next to it, a clipboard held a printed list of names with numbers beside each. Some were crossed out in red pen. I scanned the list. A few names I recognized, not personally but from news stories. Missing persons from the last couple of years. My phone buzzed in my pocket, startling me. Unknown. Take seat 41. I froze. The message came through without signal bars. Another buzz. You're late. I backed toward the booth door. My foot knocked something, a small walkie-talkie. It hissed with static. Then a voice came through, down in front. I killed my flashlight and pressed against the wall, listening. The theater below was still silent, but I could feel that someone else was in there now. I eased down the stairs and peered into the auditorium. A figure was moving along the front row, bending over each seat, checking the numbers. They stopped at one, straightened, and turned toward the aisle. The plastic over the seats crinkled softly. I slid back into the shadows and moved toward the exit. Halfway there, the walkie in my pocket crackled again. Seat 41 is open. I didn't answer. I slipped out into the hall and pulled the door shut behind me. I left the mall without looking back, crossing the lot to my car in a straight line, my boots crunching on glass. In the driver's seat, I pulled out my phone. No new messages. No evidence of the ones I'd just gotten. But when I started the engine, a slip of duct tape fluttered from my jacket pocket. It had my name on it, and the number 41. I heard the clapper before I saw it. A hollow, metallic bang, bang, bang echoing down the tunnel, slow and steady like a bell for the dead. It wasn't a sound you mistake for kids fooling around. It was too old, too heavy. Every strike made the walls vibrate, and in the damp air of the storm drain, it felt like the whole place was breathing with it. That was the first sign the water was coming. I don't make a habit of going into storm drains, but my younger brother lost his bike down here 2 days earlier. He and his friends had been racing along the neighborhood slope toward the old drain entrance, a concrete mouth gaping at the bottom of the hill. They dared each other to ride right up to the lip and stop at the last second. My brother had misjudged his brake, and the bike had bounced down the slope, tumbling into the tunnel. None of them wanted to go in after it. The place stank, and the older kids always told stories about rats and ghosts down there. So it just sat somewhere in the dark. He didn't care about the bike, but my mom did. It wasn't new, but it wasn't cheap either, and she reminded me that I was the responsible one. I figured I'd just walk in, grab it, and be out in 15 minutes. The thing about the old storm drain system is that it's a relic, big, concrete tunnels from decades ago when the city overbuilt everything. Most of the time it's dry, but when it rains upstream, even miles away, the water comes fast. That's what the clapper was for. Before modern sirens, The city had installed these heavy steel arms that swung and hit a plate when water pressure rose. The banging echoed for blocks underground. Old-timers said you could hear it in your bones before you heard it with your ears. I'd never heard one before. The tunnel swallowed my flashlight beam in that strange way big spaces do. The smell was a mix of wet leaves, mildew, and something sour. My boots scraped on the concrete, sending little echoes ahead of me. Spray-painted arrows pointed deeper in dripping green. Probably the work of the skateboard kids who bragged about riding down here. About 50 yards in, I found my brother's bike. The back wheel was bent, the handlebars twisted but otherwise intact. I almost turned around right then, but those arrows kept catching my light, and my brain whispered, it can't hurt to see where they lead. The further I went, the colder the air got. The tunnel narrowed, then branched. In the distance, I heard the faint hiss of moving water, like a faucet barely cracked. That's when the clapper started. Bang, bang, bang. It was slow, methodical. I froze, tried to remember how far the nearest creek was upstream. It hadn't rained here in days, but upstream was another story. It could be pouring miles away, and I wouldn't know. That's when I saw the tether lines. Thick nylon ropes were anchored to steel bolts along the tunnel wall, disappearing into the dark ahead. They weren't part of the city's system. Someone had set them up for moving along the wall when the water rose. I followed one for a few yards and found it cut clean through. The end burned as if sealed by flame. The beam of my flashlight caught movement ahead, a figure in a hood, bent over a coil of copper wire. He looked up, eyes flashing in the light. Wrong way, he said flatly. I didn't answer. My instincts were screaming that this wasn't the kind of guy you stopped to chat with. Scrappers worked in crews and didn't like witnesses. He stood, dropping the wire, and took a step toward me. The water hiss grew louder, and the clapper's pace picked up. Bang, bang, bang instead of the slow toll. You hear that? He said, almost grinning. That's the clock. Behind him, the tunnel dipped into a curve. Water was already pooling at his boots. I turned to go, but he shouted, wrong ways faster. It was insane advice, back toward deeper water. But the main tunnel behind me was long and straight, and if the water hit fast enough, I'd be running against a flood with no high ground. The branch he pointed to sloped upward on the map I'd seen once in a city planning pamphlet. I hesitated, and in that second, the first wave came, a knee-high rush of brown water that slammed into my shins and almost took my footing. The scrapper grabbed one of the ropes and swung himself into the branch. Move! I followed, the water sucking at my boots. The branch was narrower, the ceiling lower, forcing me to hunch. My light caught floating debris, sticks, leaves, something that looked like a shoe. The rope here was intact, and I gripped it hard as the current pulled. We climbed for what felt like forever. The banging of the clapper faded behind us, replaced by the roar of water chasing us. My lungs burned. My boots were bricks. Finally, the tunnel ended in a rusted ladder leading up to a grate. The scrapper shoved it, and it clanged open into pale daylight. We hauled ourselves out into a patch of weeds behind an industrial yard, water spilling out of the drain below. I collapsed on the grass, gasping. He just stood there, dripping, and said, "You learn quick." Most don't. Then he picked up his coil of copper from where he'd stashed it earlier and walked away without another word. I never told my mom how bad it got down there. I just brought back my brother's busted bike and let her think it had been easy. But sometimes when I wake in the night, I hear that slow, hollow bang, bang, bang in my head. And I know exactly what it means. Somewhere, water is already coming, and you don't have as much time as you think. The first thing I saw through the lens was a boat that shouldn't have been there. No running lights, no name painted on the hull. Just a dark skiff bobbing beyond the reef in water too shallow for anything that size. I lowered my camera and squinted into the wind. Out here, a boat without lights meant one of two things. Somebody was lost, or they didn't want to be found. I've always chased photographs in strange places. Old buildings, fogged over fields, train yards at dawn, places where the air feels thick with stories. That's what brought me to the old Crandall Point Lighthouse. It hadn't been active for over 20 years. The Coast Guard replaced it with a steel tower a mile down the coast, leaving the brick tower and keepers' quarters to rot on their rocky outcrop. A no trespassing sign was bolted to the rusting gate, but I'd heard the padlock was long gone. Locals said teens went there to drink or dare each other to climb the spiral stairs to the lantern room. I came for the photos, the weathered red brick against the gray Atlantic, the cracked Fresnel lens catching the last light of day. I wasn't expecting to find more. The tide was low when I crossed the rock spit, my camera bag thumping against my hip. The wind cut through my jacket, carrying the smell of salt and old seaweed. The lighthouse rose ahead, its paint scoured to bare stone in places, gulls wheeling overhead. The door to the keeper's quarters was ajar, hinges sagging. Inside, the air was damp and stale. The floors creaked under my boots. I started snapping shots, peeling wallpaper, an overturned chair, a desk with its drawers yanked out. That's when I noticed the bucket in the corner. It was a clean, bright orange plastic bucket, way too new for this place. Inside were a half-dozen hardbound ledgers, each wrapped in a trash bag to keep them dry. My curiosity overrode my better judgment. I unwrapped the top one. It was a logbook, lines of tidy handwriting in blue ink. Only, these weren't the weather reports or lamp maintenance notes you'd expect from a lighthouse. They were lists of boat names and numbers, dates, coordinates, short phrases, 2 crates, 4 packs, pickup successful. The entries started the year after the lighthouse was shut down, and they went right up to last week. That was when I leaned toward the cracked window and lifted my camera toward the horizon. The boat was there, low and dark against the silver chop, exactly where the most recent entry's coordinates would put it. Through the zoom lens, I saw 2 men aboard. One stood at the bow with binoculars. The other hauled something from the water, a heavy duffel bag dripping. The wind shifted, carrying a faint metallic clink from the tower above me. I froze. Someone else was here. I eased into the stairwell, keeping my footsteps light. The iron spiral groaned with each step as I climbed toward the lantern room. The sound came again, a chain dragging across metal. At the top, I stayed low and peered around the doorway. A man in a weather-beaten jacket was hauling a jerry can up the last steps from the exterior gallery. He set it by the base of the old Fresnel lens, then pulled a battered handheld radio from his pocket and spoke into it. I couldn't make out the words over the wind, but he was looking straight out at the dark skiff. This wasn't an abandoned lighthouse. It was a lookout. I knew I had to get out without being seen, but the stairwell was narrow. If he started down, he'd see me immediately. My only option was the gallery. I crept through the lantern room and out the door. The gallery was a narrow ring of metal grating bolted to the outside of the tower. The wind hit me hard, smelling of diesel from the jerry can inside. My boots scraped on rust. From here, the drop was 20 feet to the rocks. My fingers curled around the cold railing as I edged toward the side away from the skiff. The tide had risen. The spit I'd crossed earlier was already thinning under white water. Behind me, I heard the man's boots on the lantern room floor. I spotted a lightning rod bolted along the tower's side, running down to the keeper's roof. It was the only way. I swung one leg over the railing and grabbed the rod. The metal was slick with salt, my gloves barely holding. Half climbing, half sliding, I made it down to the keeper's roof, then crouched and scrambled toward the far side. The wind whipped at my jacket, threatening to pull me off. From above, the man's voice rose, sharp now, angry. He noticed the open bucket or the missing book I'd forgotten to rewrap. I didn't wait to hear more. I dropped from the roof to the rocks, jarring my knees, and ran for the narrowing spit. The water was already calf deep when I splashed across. Back in my car, shivering and soaked, I set the wet logbook on the passenger seat. I thought about driving straight to the police, but then I pictured the man in the lantern room, the radio in his hand, the skiff beyond the reef. Whoever they weren't working alone, and they had the high ground. I drove home instead. That night, I checked the coordinates from the last few entries against an online map. Most were spots along the coast where no one anchored without a reason. One was less than a mile from a private marina. The latest entry had tomorrow's date. I still don't know if I'm going back. But if I do, I won't be bringing just my camera. I didn't hear the siren at first. I felt it. A low, animal hum pressed against my ribs, steady as a heartbeat that didn't belong to me. It seeped up through the steel, grating under my boots, through the handrails, through my fingertips. The kind of sound that makes fillings whisper and makes you want to swallow for no reason. The floodlights were long gone. The turbine hull was a blue-black vault, colder than outside, and the only light was my narrow beam cutting a cone through dust. Somewhere below, something breathed out a hollow, metallic note, then another, a fraction higher, like it was learning to sing. That was the moment I realized the silence of Unit 4 wasn't silence at all. It had a pulse. Okay, breathe. I'll roll back a second. I'm not a thrill seeker. I'm not the guy who free climbs cranes for likes. I'm a cautious person who plans shots, carries spare batteries, and checks weather twice. My channel is small, urban exploring, nothing glamorous. Old warehouses, forgotten stations, a farmhouse with newspapers from the 90s still on the coffee table. I keep to the law where I can, and when I can't, I keep to common sense. I wear a hard hat and steel toes because I like my skull intact and my feet attached. So when I got a message about a decommissioned power plant 2 towns over, I did my homework. Shuddered after a retrofit failed the inspection. Security cut to a drive-by twice a night. Locals complained of a foghorn sound on windy evenings. A kid said you could make coins dance on the railing when the hum started. That last part sounded like folklore. The rest was plausible. Power plants are cathedrals of steel. Huge, empty spaces, industrial bones stripped of flesh. Good for atmosphere. I parked down the road and came through the south fence where the barbed wire sagged. It was just after midnight. The sky was a flat lid of cloud, and the plant wore it like a hat. Up close it felt wrong to call it abandoned. The buildings were too big to leave behind. They hunkered there in the dark, brick and rust and glass teeth. Unit 4's stack rose like a blackened finger. A loose length of chain clinked against a railing. My light found it, shining a brief star, then moved on. Here's what led me to the catwalk where I felt the hum. Copper. Scrappers. If you've done this long enough, you learn to read the signs. Fresh cuts in conduit. Footprints in dust that haven't rounded over with time. Ropes staged near a drop. Scrappers work fast and mean, and they don't like witnesses. As soon as I ducked inside turbine hull, I knew they'd been through. A strip of wire, cleanly peeled of insulation, lay coiled like a snake on the floor. The scent of metal and old oil was layered with something bitter, sour-sweet. I told myself it was stale diesel. I should have turned around then. But the hall was vast and beautiful in a way only machine rooms can be. An inland sea of steel, cranes frozen mid-gesture, pipelines like ribs. My light found Turbine 4, a whale of a thing, housing removed and guts on display, rotors exposed like vertebrae. I wanted the shots I pictured. 10 minutes, I told myself. In and out. If anyone came, I would hear them. I took long shots from the mezzanine, then wide angle from the floor. Bird droppings starred the concrete. Something like snow glittered underfoot, but it was just fiberglass from torn insulation. The farther I walked, the more the foghorn stories felt less like rumors and more like a misheard memory. The air had that hell-breath quality places get when they haven't been opened in a long time. My own breath sounded too loud in my earplugs. Then I felt it, the pressure, a thrumming I didn't hear so much as register in my teeth. I stopped, and the handrail under my glove ticked like a quiet metronome. I swept the light across the floor and found the first trench, one of those long, lidded channels where cables once ran. Several covers were gone. A black stripe opened between concrete slabs. The hum rose, thin and reedy, then stabilized. I crouched. Cold air breathed out of the gap. It smelled like metal, damp concrete, and rotten eggs. That's when the word methane skated across my mind, followed by sewer gas and hydrogen sulfide. Power plants don't make methane, but they do have drains, sumps, and cavities. Raw makes gas. Gas trapped makes pressure. Pressure finds a way. I angled my light into the trench. The beam came back fogged with mist. A few inches down, there was water, black like a mirror made of oil. Ripples lapped the broken edge. Something in the dark moved bubbles in slow, round clusters. The hum rose on a breath and fell. The siren, I thought, a flawed valve somewhere, breathing through the network, vibrating the railings and the catwalks. The idea was ridiculous and exactly right. The place was exhaling. A scuff echoed in the hall. Then a whisper, too soft to make words, but too many consonants to be the wind. I killed my light out of reflex and immediately hated the dark. Slow, I thumbed it down to its lowest setting. My pupils spread until the hall sharpened into a grainy black and white movie. On the far side of Unit 4, between a ladder and a stack of ducting, a glimmer of movement passed and stilled. A thin, quick shadow. Then another. Scrappers. I knew their pattern. Work in pairs or threes. One cuts, one coils, one watches. The watcher is the bad news. If the watcher thinks you're security, you're a problem. If the watcher thinks you're a rival, you're prey. I didn't want to be either. The nearest cover across the trench was skewed. If I stepped around, I'd be on the open floor and in their line of sight. The safer route was up. I backed to the stair, kept my beam low and narrow, and put my boots on the metal with care. Every step made the hum climb a half note, as if the plant tuned itself to my weight. The catwalk flexed under me. I hate flexible heights. I tell myself it's safe. I tell myself it's designed to wiggle. It doesn't matter. My body knows when steel isn't still. Halfway up the side of Turbine 4, a graded walkway ran like a spine from the mezzanine to a maintenance platform. There was a gap in one panel where someone had dragged heavy equipment across long ago. The edges were bent into shark teeth. Past that, the walkway turned and crossed above the cable trench. If I got there, I could move quiet and stay above eye level. I breathed through my nose and kept my light on the floor, letting the handrail keep me honest. Below, another whisper louder. A tiny flashlight blinked twice, then stayed dark, a signal. A man's voice, then a second, both low. One of them laughed, short and breathy, like a cough without the cough. My chest tightened. I told myself, they won't come up if they don't have to. Gravity is a thief's enemy. They'll stick to the floor. At the platform, I paused. The hum had found a frequency that made my vision tremble, as if I were looking through heat. I had to put a palm flat on the railing to steady the camera. The metal felt damp. On instinct, I sniffed my glove. That's sour sweet, more rotten egg now, plus something almost like paint thinner. I imagined a network of narrow channels under the floor, all half flooded, breathing out gas through hairline cracks. vibrating like harmonics in a flute. I imagined a spark. The thought made my stomach lurch. I clipped the camera leash to a belt loop. It wasn't much, but it was something. The walkway narrowed, then bridged over the black stripe of the trench. I could see down into it as I crossed. The water below was not still. It moved like a chest, rising and falling. I told myself I was reading my own footsteps in the ripples. I told myself I was tired. Then something pale swam up from the dark and broke. A disc the size of a plate, fizzing silver, gas, not a creature. It popped without sound I could hear over the hum. The air grew heavier. A click behind me, metal on metal. I froze, turned just enough to see. A figure stood at the base of the stairs I'd used. He had a headlamp around his neck off. The small light in his hand made a coin of glow on the floor. He tilted it up and caught me in the edge. The light paused on my chest, on the camera, then moved to my boots. He couldn't see my face. I couldn't see his. But I could feel the attention like heat. He raised his other hand and made a slow, clear gesture down. I shook my head. He whistled, a piercing note that made the hum shiver. It wasn't a call for help. It was a flag. From the far side of the hall, a reply came, 2 notes. Now I knew how many. 3 at least. The one below me took a step toward the stairs. The grating I stood on creaked. I had a choice. Go back and run the long floor to the south door, or commit to the high route and aim for the maintenance gantry that led to the auxiliary platform and a side exit. The high route kept me off their path, but put me on the flexing, singing steel over the trench. I looked at the gap ahead, where one panel had a missing toe plate and the handrail was bent. If I misstepped and dropped a leg through, I'd be stuck like a trapped animal above a pit of bad air. The man below took another step. The light in his hand slid along the stair, catching old grease and rust. "Hey," he said, almost conversational. "Hey, big man." I didn't answer. The first rule is, don't give more information than you have to. Don't give your voice, your age, your fear. I inched forward. The hum rose again, getting under my fingernails. The panel with shark teeth waited. To cross, I had to put weight on a bent edge and trust that its memory of strength would hold for one more person. It didn't. The moment my heel rolled onto it, the tooth folded. My foot dropped to the shin. The grating edge bit my calf through the fabric with a hot, tearing sensation. Reflex made me grab for the handrail with both hands, and the camera, my idiot camera, swung hard and smacked the rail, then pinwheeled. The leash caught. The jolt pulled me sideways. Pain flared in my calf. For a second I saw nothing but exploding stars. When they cleared, my leg was wedged through the panel, the backs of my thighs screaming where the metal held me. Below, the trench breathed. "Whoa," the man below said, delighted. He took 2 quick steps up. "Easy, big man." My hands were slick. I didn't know if it was sweat or the damp on the rail. The camera swung, hit the grating again, and dangled, clicking. I tried to pull my leg out, but the angle was wrong. My boot heel caught. The more I twisted, the louder the hum got, as if the plant enjoyed my panic. "Don't move," the man said. "I'll come get you. We'll help you down." He didn't mean help. I could hear it in the way help went soft. I set my jaw and did the single dumbest, smartest thing. I unclipped the camera leash. The camera dropped. For half a heartbeat, I thought it would disappear into the trench, but the strap whipped once around a cross brace and snagged. The body swung like a pendulum over the dark, then smacked the support and came to rest. It was expensive. It was my work. I watched it hang there and felt the same cold I felt from the trench. Then I slid both hands to the bent panel edge near my trapped leg, pushed down to make it flex away from my skin, and yanked backward like I was trying to pull a boot out of mud. Flesh tore. My breath made a clamp noise in my throat. My leg came free, so suddenly I fell backward against the handrail ribs cracking lightning across my chest. The panel bounced back and jammed. I crabbed sideways, dragging the injured leg until I found intact grating. Below, the man had climbed 2 more steps. He grinned up at me now with his lamp briefly lit under his chin so I could see teeth and the shape of the cap. Bleeding, he said as if that were news. You're leaving a trail. Behind him, to the right, his second figure moved, a heavier one slower. The watcher. He had something in his hand that caught the low light with a dull shine. Not a gun, I guessed. A hook, maybe. A crowbar. The hum took a new tone, higher, more urgent, like boiling. Somewhere down the hall, an old valve chattered, SHSHSHSH, then went still. I realized, as if it belonged to someone else's thoughts, methane rises. Hydrogen sulfide sinks. This trench, whatever gases gathered here, was a trap for both. Every footstep, every laugh, every metal-on-metal scrape was a spark waiting to happen. Don't come up, I said before I could stop myself. My voice sounded weird, as if it had to swim through the hum to get out. Bad air, the man repeated, amused. What, you OSHA? Bad air, I said again, pointing with one hand at the black line below us. Open trench. Gas. No flame. He snorted. No flame, he said to the watcher, mocking. He took another step up. I didn't wait. I limped as fast as I could along the catwalk, each step making the whole structure shiver and sing. At the midspan, the handrail had a collapsed section where corrosion had eaten the uprights away. The replacement had been fixed with baling wire long ago. Behind the gap, a maintenance ladder dropped to a service platform that ran to the outer wall, away to the auxiliary stair and maybe clean air. To reach it, I had to cross the section where the handrail was weakest. The hum peaked, then dipped, then peaked again, a wobble like feedback. It climbed into a range that made the hair at the back of my neck prickle. The man on the stairs paused, head cocked. The watcher lifted his dull tool as if to taste the vibration with it. I put my weight on the next panel and felt it flex. The baling wire sang like a plucked string. I moved anyway. The rail stung my palm. One more step. The platform yawned ahead like a promise. The wire snapped. The handrail slumped outward, pulled by its own weight. For a second, the world tilted. I grabbed at nothing, caught a vertical post with 3 fingers, slipped, and slammed my chest against the grating. The breath went out of me like a punch bag. Below, the trench exhaled a new, sharp puff. The hum faltered and surged, as if something below had shifted. Careful, the man called cheerfully, already halfway up. He was closer than he had any right to be. The watcher behind him didn't speak. He just kept coming, steady as a clock. I crawled the last yard on hands and knees. The platform's lip kissed my fingertips. I hooked my elbows over it and rolled. Pain ripped up my leg again where the panel had chewed me. My vision tunneled. The hum swelled behind my eyes until it was all I could hear, a single note that ate air. On the platform, I pressed my back to the cool bulk of the turbine casing and fumbled. There was a service hatch here. I'd seen it earlier in a schematic stenciled on the wall. My headlamp threw a shaky circle. The hatch's wheel was rusty but intact, and a heavy padlock hung open. Someone else had been through. I spun the wheel. It squealed. Below, the watcher lifted his tool and tapped the catwalk once hard. The impact rang like a bell through the structure, and the hum shifted, found that frequency, and settled on it as if satisfied. The catwalk vibrated visibly now, a shimmer you could see. Dust motes shook loose and fell like glitter into the trench. I threw the hatch open and stared into a throat of darkness. A maintenance tunnel ran along the wall, ribs of cable hangers like cage bars. Cold air moved in it, real air clean of the sour reek. It led, I hoped, to the auxiliary stair and the side door that faced the service yard. I ducked into the throat, pulled the hatch behind me until only a slit of light remained, and listened. The man reached the flexing section and stopped. He spat into the trench and watched the droplet vanish. "Don't like this," he said, not to me. "Feels bad." "Oh," the watcher said. First word I'd heard from him. His voice was like gravel stirred. "Feels bad," the man repeated, but he went. He stepped where I'd stepped, put his weight where I had, trusted the same tired metal to carry him. The grating moaned. The hum climbed and climbed until it broke into an upper register that made my jaw ache. The watcher moved as well, slower but relentless. I pulled the hatch shut. The tunnel swallowed the sound down to a muffled throb. I stood with my forehead against the cold steel and breathed until a little white flake drifted down in front of my nose and landed on the floor with the gentlest touch. Not snow. Paint? No. In the dim, the floor glistened faintly where the flake had touched. Crystals. Frost. The tunnel air was colder, cleaner. It scraped the rotten egg edge out of my nose and left a metallic taste. My leg throbbed. Warm wetness filled my boot. I wanted to sit, but I knew if I did it would be hard to stand again. I started walking, one hand gliding on the curved wall for balance. The tunnel curved with the building's edge, then straightened, then offered a ladder up through another hatch. I put an ear to it, quiet on the other side except for the plant's distant breath. I pushed, and night air met my face. Real night, with damp grass and the far tremor of highway trucks. I came out onto a narrow exterior, landing halfway up Unit 4's wall. The auxiliary stair sloped down to the yard. The chain that once blocked it hung loose, broken. Beyond the fence, my car was a shadow under dead vines. Behind me, through the wall, the hum went keening, then abruptly died. The silence left in its place was so sudden my body tottered with it. For a heartbeat I thought, explosion. But no light, no heat, just absence, like a refrigerator finally switched off, leaving you to notice your own breathing. A shape moved below. The watcher had found his own exit to the yard. He looked up, not at me, but at the stack as if checking a clock only he could read. The man with him, lighter on his feet, jogged out from a different doorway, rubbing his forearms as if cold. They didn't look up the stair. They didn't look at me. They looked at the dark stack and then at each other, and then the lighter one laughed that cough laugh again and said, "See? Nothing." The watcher said nothing. He turned and walked out of the yard, not toward the south road where I'd parked, but toward the rail embankment. The lighter one followed, talking, swinging his flashlight by its strap so the circle danced. They didn't hurry. They didn't look back. I stood there shivering until my muscles loosened enough to move. Then I went down the stair, past the weeds growing through the cracks. At the bottom, I paused at the corner of the building and looked back at the square of the maintenance hatch high on the wall. No one followed. In the car, I tore a t-shirt into strips and wrapped my calf as tight as I could manage. The fabric bloomed dark. I tasted metal where I'd bitten my lip. My hand shook so hard my keys rattled in the ignition. I thought about the camera hanging over the trench like a man in a story who drops his fortune to save his skin. I thought about going back for it. I thought about the hum stopping. On the drive home, with the windows cracked to keep me awake, I heard again, not in my ears, but in my bones, a phantom note that rose and fell with the road. Every time I crossed a bridge, the railing hummed under my palm in memory. The next morning, I woke to a smell that wasn't in my apartment. Old oil, damp concrete, and sulfur. My calf was swollen, the bandage stuck into the tear like a plaster in a mouth. I soaked it off and sat on the edge of the tub until the world stopped going gray. While I could stand, I limped to my desk and opened my laptop. The local news site had a 2-paragraph piece. Power plant break-in suspected. Fire crews called for odor complaint. area cleared. No explosion, no fire. A photo showed a ladder truck near Unit 4 South Door, a man in turnout gear, standing with his head tilted as if listening. The caption said, "Venting procedures ongoing." I thought about the trench, black water rising and falling, bubbles like silver plates. I thought about the stack like a finger on a throat, pressing to find a voice. There are two things I keep from that night. One is a long, thin scar along the back of my calf, a white smile where the grating bit me. The other is the last frame my camera shot before I dropped it, an automatic exposure taken while it swung. It's blurred and pointless, a diagonal smear of rail, a smear of dark, a smear of pale. But if you tilt your head and squint, you can see the trench, you can see the rail, and you can see something between them that wasn't there in person. A halo of mist marked with concentric ripples, like rings in a bell jar. You could tell yourself, it's just the lens catching breath. You could say it's water vapor. You could say many sensible things. Here's what I say. The plant was singing to itself, and I got too close to the song. I cut the strap to drop the instrument. I left the hall before the music stopped. And if the sound finds me on long roads late at night, if I feel it in my teeth when I cross metal, I don't complain. I just drive a little faster, and I don't breathe deep. The door shut behind me with a sound too final for an abandoned building. It wasn't the kind of slam you get from wind catching a loose hinge. It was deliberate, a broom handle wedged through the hasp on the outside. I knew it before I even rattled the latch. And that was when I realized I wasn't alone in the cold room. I was there for a photography meetup. A local group of urban explorers had organized a tour of the old Halford meat packing plant, shuttered for nearly a decade, now just rusting steel and concrete a block from the river. They told us to split into smaller teams to cover more ground, then regroup in the front offices before sunset. I volunteered for the cold rooms. I'd seen them once before, years ago, when the building was still open for business. They'd been massive walk-in freezers with walls of white tile, each one big enough to store entire sides of beef. I figured I could get some good symmetry shots, the long rows of hooks, the tile shining under a flashlight beam. The others peeled off toward the loading docks. I ducked into the west wing, past the gutted processing floor, until I found the first freezer door. It was heavy, metal-skinned, with a handle that still turned smooth despite the years. Inside, the air was like ice in my lungs. My flashlight beam turned the frost on the tiles into a galaxy. I started snapping photos, moving deeper between the rows of steel rails overhead. That's when the door swung shut. I crossed the floor in 3 long strides and tried the latch. It wouldn't budge. I pulled harder. That's when I heard the faint scrape of wood against metal, the broom handle, locking me in. I banged on the door and shouted. My voice echoed, deadened by the insulation. Nothing. When I turned back into the room, my light caught movement. Just a shadow at first, slipping between 2 columns of hooks. Hello. My breath smoked in the beam. No answer. I walked toward where I'd seen it. The floor was slick with a thin layer of ice that had formed from decades of condensation. My boots squeaked. In the far corner, someone had set up a makeshift table out of stacked crates. On it sat a small LED lantern, a pile of blankets, and a half-empty bottle of water. Beside the table, a cardboard box overflowed with sealed packages. Meat, frozen solid, stamped with dates from only weeks ago. The plant was supposed to be abandoned. Footsteps sounded behind me. I spun, flashlight beam cutting across the frost. A man stood by the hooks. His clothes were mismatched, work pants, a hoodie, a battered jacket over both. He held a long piece of rebar like a walking stick, but his grip said it was more than that. "You're not supposed to be in here," he said. I tried to keep my voice steady. "Neither are you." His eyes flicked toward the door, then back to me. That's different. I glanced at the crates of meat. You using this place to store? He stepped forward just enough to make the rebar catch the light. Best place in the city to keep things cold. No rent, no eyes. The air seemed colder now, but maybe that was just the weight of his stare. I'm leaving, I said. He smiled faintly. No, not yet. We stood there for a long moment, the only sound the soft hum of my flashlight. Finally, he jerked his chin toward the far wall. Against the tile. I didn't move. Now, he said, and the rebar twitched in his hands. I backed toward the wall, my boots sliding on the ice. My breath came in clouds, shallow and quick. He stopped a few feet away, studying me like he was deciding something. Then he pointed the rebar at the crates. You didn't see this. You don't talk about it. You walk out when I tell you to. Understand? I nodded. The seconds stretched. Finally, he stepped past me and yanked the broom handle from the latch. The door creaked open, spilling warmer air into the room. I didn't wait for a second invitation. I slipped out, my boots slapping on the concrete, not stopping until I reached the lights spilling in from the loading dock. When I looked back down the hall, the cold room door was shut again. I never told the group what happened. Just said the cold room wasn't worth photographing. But I still have one picture from inside, an accidental shot when my finger brushed the shutter as I turned toward the movement. It's blurred, grainy, but you can see the edge of the crates. And behind them, the faint outline of another figure I never saw in person. It wasn't my cough that answered me. I cleared my throat in the dark auditorium, and a second cough came back a heartbeat later. Same pitch, same scrape, like the room was correcting me. Then I heard breathing that wasn't mine, steady and shallow, coming through the cracked vent under the stage. The hairs on my arms lifted. I stepped back, my boots squeaked on the varnished floor, and the sound from the vent squeaked too, just out of sync, like a bad lip sync of the room. Okay, let me back up and tell you why I was there at all. I went to Ridgeview Middle 20 years ago. Beige brick, mirrored windows that made summers feel like you were being baked in a science experiment. The smell in the halls that never left. Old textbooks, floor wax, and dust. The city fenced it off last winter and put up a sign, demolition permits pending. They were turning it into townhouses or storage or something. A couple of us from my year texted in the alumni group about one last look, but people have kids and schedules, and nostalgia runs hot and dies cold. What tipped me from talk to action was a rumor we'd traded since 8th grade, a time capsule under the auditorium stage. We'd buried it with Mr. Banerjee during a future me assembly. 2 shoeboxes taped together, our notes stuffed inside, a Polaroid of the class taped to the lid. Half the grade swore it was a myth. The rest said it had been moved to the library before renovations. I remembered the principal joking about the theater being the heart of the school. If a thing was hidden where no one looked, it was under that stage. I'm not a breaker of laws by hobby. I work maintenance for a property manager. I hate sloppy risks. But the building was days from being rubble, and the fence had a section leaning outward like a shrug. I told myself I'd slip in, check the stage, and be out before midnight. No graffiti, no vandalism, just a note from a kid version of me. Hello/goodbye. The shop wing was easiest to pry open. Someone had already cut a square out of the plywood covering the door, then replaced it like a lid. Inside, the air was cool and stale. My flashlight found the chalkboard still filled with geometry problems half erased by time. The trophy case in the main hall was cracked and empty. Home of the Ridgeview Hawks peeled off the wall in blue curls. I knew the way blindfolded. Straight, then left at the lockers with the dent from when a 6th grader threw a trumpet case. Then down the ramp to the double doors with porthole windows. The auditorium swallowed the beam of my light like an animal swallowing a small thing. Seats rose in long, raked rows to the back wall. The stage curtain hung limp and dusty. The exit signs were dead. I walked to the lip of the stage and crouched. The orchestra pit had been covered years ago with removable panels. A streamer of police tape lay like a shed skin. The pit hatch on stage right had a recessed finger hole. I hooked it and pulled. The panel resisted, then slid. Blackness yawned. The old steel ladder was still there, eaten to lace by rust, but holding. That was when I coughed into the dark and the auditorium coughed back. I froze and listened. The echo in that room was always slow. A shout took a half second to come home. But this return wasn't a room. It was almost a room. The difference between a copy and a human voice trying to be one. I swept the light. The beam crossed the velvet seats, the aisles, the sound booth at the back. No movement. The beam drifted toward the stage apron again and hopped off the cracked vent. A square hole where the HVAC used to push air from understage crawl spaces. There, more than anywhere else, the breathing seemed thickest. Not loud, just present. I swung my legs into the pit, telling myself to finish what I came for. The ladder felt like wet bones. At the bottom, the beam found scuffed pit walls, graffiti, KS Rules 2008, a forgotten music stand. A door under stage left should have led to the storage rooms and the trap space where we kept flats and risers. It opened under my hand with a rubbery sigh. You remember smells more than sights. Back there it smelled like damp wood, mildew blooming in slow motion, and faintly like old makeup, the kind we use for the spring musical. My light splashed across a corner filled with broken chairs, rolled marley flooring, a collapsed cardboard tree. Past it, the crawl space, a low plywood-walled corridor snaking behind the stage's face, tall enough to hunch in, not tall enough to stand. Someone had dragged in a sleeping bag. Next to it, energy bar wrappers, a soda bottle half full of brown liquid, and neatly stacked in a plastic bin, notebooks. I crouched. The top notebook was college-ruled. The first page had dates in the left margin and columns across the top. Make / model, color, plate time. Below, lines filled in with tidy block letters. 9.14, Toyota, silver, 7BM, 2213. 9.14, Ford truck, blue, DVX, 2234. 9.15, Subaru, red, 2350. The pages turned and the pattern continued. Occasional notes in the right margin. Cut fence, teens, camera. The breath on my neck wasn't a room. That's what I was thinking as I turned the page. This wasn't someone camping here because it was dry. Someone had been watching, logging, recording who came to a dead school at night. A cheap action cam sat in the bin beneath the notebooks, its lens taped over with gauze to dull the reflection. A coiled cord ran from the back of it to a hole punched through the plywood into the auditorium. The cable felt new. There was no fur of dust on its rubber. I reached toward the stack again, and my phone buzzed. I flinched so hard my light slapped the ceiling. The text preview said, unknown, leave the notebooks. I went cold and hot at the same time. The number had no name and no history. The message timestamp was now. I backed up out of the crawl space into the pit, bringing the notebook by reflex. When I hit the pit door, the auditorium beyond it felt suddenly enormous, as if the rows of seats were leaning forward to listen. Okay, I said to the dark, like an idiot talking to an empty room. It wasn't empty. On the stage above the pit, near the center, a small rectangle glowed faintly white. A phone face down, its flashlight turned on, throwing a puddle of light that didn't belong. It illuminated dust motes and the edge of a rope, one of the ancient hemp lines that used to haul the rear traveler curtain. Except these lines had been cut when the fly system came down years ago. This rope wasn't old. It was twine run through the stage to somewhere under the seating. I played my light along it and saw the twine disappear under the first row. My stomach did a small, reasonable flip. I went up the ladder anyway, because the part of me that came for a shoebox believed in old plans more than new threats. On stage, the twine fed through a drilled hole. Whoever had strung it had done it from under the stage, then out into the house, and then down through the risers to the underside of the retractable bleachers on the right wall. Those bleachers were my favorite place in gym class because you could hide a book there. They were also semi-automatic. A caregiver bar and safety pins held them locked. Pull the bar and the rows could retract into the wall with a motor that hadn't worked since 2010. I remembered Coach yelling at us never to touch the pins. "You'll lose a finger," he'd say, then clap his hands. I had a sudden, clear picture of how this would work. Pull the twine, pop the safety pins on the bottom section, and the bleachers would drop a foot or slide a little. Enough to spook a trespasser. Maybe enough to trap someone underneath. My phone buzzed again. Unknown. "You're still holding the notebook." I stopped breathing. "Put it down." Another message came. Then, under the phone, "Leave it and go." I put it down because a person who runs a string under bleachers has practiced how far the seats fall, and I didn't know the difference between a lesson and a trap. I slid the notebook under the glowing phone. Dust gritted under my palms. Good, the phone chimed. "Stay on stage. Walk left." I didn't move. Walk left, came another message. "Toward the wing." Slowly, I moved to the right instead because some stabs of fear come out crooked as stubbornness. I took 2 steps toward the proscenium, and someone under the bleachers yanked the twine. The first 3 rows lurched forward a fraction and slammed back. The boom hit the room a second after the movement, the echo a second after that. It was a kid's prank turned to an adult's demonstration. "See? I can reach you from places you're not looking." I went left to the wing. Behind the main drape, the wing cramped into narrow paths between flats and dusty ladders. I found the stage manager's desk, fuse box, headsets connected to nothing, an old prompt book with pencil notes. The prop room door had a combination lock that swung open without code. Inside, on a milk crate, was a stack of plates still taped together, part of a Greek wedding scene from Show Before My Time. On the crate, another phone, screen crisscrossed with cracks, showing a live view of me between flats. The camera was in the wall or the vent. I reached up and put my hand across the slatted vent. Air moved across my fingers, cold and a little sweet. I didn't like it. I backed out to stage and felt, more than heard, small footsteps in the house. I edged to the curtain and peeked. A rectangle of the back wall, near the sound booth, glowed faintly. Someone had propped the door. A figure moved below it, quick and tidy, keeping low, strong forearms, compact build, and knit cap pulled down. They stopped, tilted their head like they were smelling the room, and then padded to the aisle and down, not looking up, not needing to. I went the other direction. Stage left had a set of stairs that ran down to the floor and then a side door to the corridor by the band room. That door had been chained. The chain was gone. I could run. But the part of me that can't leave a task half done kept thinking of the time capsule. Ridiculous as that sounds with a person in the room who liked notebooks of plates. 5 minutes, I told myself. Get the box under the stage face and go out the side. Here's the trick about that space under the stage. It's a shallow wedge. At the front, the lip where you clap, there's barely enough room for a knee. At the back, under the black curtain, there's a 3-foot tunnel where kids dared each other to crawl and left gum under the edge. We'd nailed the shoebox under the lip near center because we'd wanted it to be in the heart, and Mr. Banerjee had humored us. I lay down on my stomach, reached under with my light, and found wood. Splinters went into my palm. I slid farther. Dust went on my nose. With the tip of my fingers, I found a ridge, a strip of wood tacked across something that shouldn't have belonged there. The strip gave under pressure, and the thing behind it yielded with a sticky sound. Tape. I pulled. Something small thumped my wrist. I slid back and held it up. A shoebox, taped in 2 loops, with the Polaroids still stuck to the lid. Faded faces in a row like ghosts of kids with haircuts that should stay buried. I wanted to laugh, because it was absurd that we'd been right. I wanted to cry, because I had something from a part of my life I don't think about because it makes my throat close. The bleachers clanged again. Not a little, not a demonstration. A run of pins popped at once, a zipper of metal. Then a grinding from within the wall, as if a motor that shouldn't work had taken one more breath. The first 4 rows telescoped out and then slipped. The sound came late. The more honest sound came first. Metal on metal, nails in wood, gravity remembering its job. I rolled and tucked the box under my shirt because fear is stupid that way. I sprinted to the pit hatch and dropped in, clipping my shin on the rim and losing my breath with a hot newborn sound. Above, the retracting bleachers found their travel and slammed, leaving a black mouth of space under them as they folded. If I'd been where I stood, I would have been at knee height with 100 tons of old seats chewing at me. In the pit, the dark pressed against my ears. I reached for the door to the trap rooms and found it, shoved it, and went into the crawl space again. The notebooks were gone from the bin. That's how fast they'd moved. The action cam cable tugged taut through the hole. Ahead, the crawl space jogged and ended at the old orchestra trap, a square cut in the pit wall that led to a masonry corridor running to the loading dock. In tales we told each other, that corridor had been a tunnel for the band to sneak out to the parking lot. In reality, it was a delivery route for risers. I took it crouch running, one hand on the low ceiling, the shoebox banging my ribs. The corridor smelled like wet cardboard. A fluorescence hum came from somewhere on the other side of the wall, the band room, maybe where the demolition crew had staged lights earlier that week. I reached the end where a steel door faced the dock. It had a panic bar with a trick we all knew. It stuck unless you leaned into the right side with your hip and hit the bar with your elbow hard. I did that. Nothing. I tried again, and the bar moved a thumb's width and stopped against a chain looped through the handle on the outside. My light found a second option. A freight lift we'd never used as kids, because it was always staff only. The lift's gate was halfway open. The floor of the platform sat 6 inches lower than the threshold. A chunk of 2x4 bridged it. In the dim you could see where someone had been using it. Fresh scrapes on metal, a handprint in dust. I pulled the gate. It squealed. The lift made no sound. Dead. But there was space behind the lift where the shaft continued. A vent, not big enough for a person, big enough for a hand. Don't, a voice said from behind me. Nothing supernatural about that. Plain voice, normal pitch, the kind of softness people use when they want you to stop faster than a shout would make you. I turned. The man from the aisle stood at the corridor's mouth, compact, cap low, hands open like he wasn't going to reach for anything. Up close, his eyes were wiry tired, the skin around them lined like bark. He didn't look feral or theatrical. He looked like a worker, not of the city, but of something that required patience and habit. "I'm leaving," I said, and hated how thin my voice was. "You are," he said, nodding at the shoebox bulge in my shirt. "Weren't expecting homework with it." My heart beat in my throat. "I didn't take your book." He smiled small. "Not mine." He tipped his head, considering me. "You shouldn't put your hand under that gate. It drops." I believed him. He stepped into the corridor, boots whispering on grit. "We don't want trouble," he said. "No one's going to jam you up for trespass. But you don't take our pages, and we don't like the stage. You understand. Your pages," I repeated. "The plates," he said, like a shopkeeper saying the bread. "People come here because they think no one's watching. Teens, men with other men's rings. Kids who tag their names and panic when they see a light. We keep track. If cops start sniffing, we make a call or two. If someone cries about being seen, they pay to forget. If they don't want to pay, we show them a printout that says trespass carries a fine of, and They decide they can't have their mom or wife or boss see a picture of them climbing a fence at midnight. It's a service. He said it without heat, not even pride, just a job. I stared at his hands, empty, relaxed. No one got hurt, he added. You dropped the seats, I said. He nodded. It wakes the room up. People pay attention when furniture moves. I realized then that two things could be true. He could mean no harm, and the system could be a guillotine waiting for the wrong neck. You ever crush anybody? I asked before my good sense could turn the sentence off. He thought about it, eyes going to the lift as if the answer were pasted there. No, he said. Not yet. Don't want to. You keep the box, by the way. You came for it. Seems fair. I hadn't told him what was under my shirt. He nodded toward the door. There's another way out. Up the ladder in the trap room by the piano storage. Comes out in the band practice hallway. We left that chain loose. You can take the ramp, or you can wait here for the police to come do their drive-by and ask you why you're hugging shoebox. Or I can call them now, I said, and hated that I said it, because it made me sound like a child threatening to tell a teacher. You can, he said. They'll write your name in a book and probably wave. In the morning, someone from the city will look at the chain and tell a guy like me to fix it. The developer wants this place quiet until they own the quiet. He shrugged. Everyone wants a cut. Behind him, a faint jostle in the crawl space said there were probably two people, not one. The twine under the stage had not pulled itself. The notebooks had not lifted from the bin because a ghost took them. I don't want your pages, I said. I don't want your service. Then don't take them, he said mildly. And don't pretend you didn't see anything. You didn't see anything worth saying out loud to anyone who likes paperwork. You saw a dead building and some rats. I'm a rat. I like notebooks. It should have made me angry. Extortion dressed up as housekeeping. Using fear where kids had played. But fear had already hollowed me out. My anger felt like a cardboard cutout with a face scribbled on. What if someone gets hurt? I asked. A kid. Those bleachers. We're there, he said. We watch. We pull a rope and the kid runs. We put the pins back. We tidy. He looked at me in a way that made me aware of my age against his. You think if we weren't here, no one would come? They'd come. They'd drop a smoke bomb or light a match or push something that doesn't forgive. We don't set fires. We take pictures. Which one puts more black on the sky? I didn't trust anyone who built their logic long enough to live inside it comfortably, but I recognized the shape of his argument because I use it on myself when I excuse cutting corners at work. It's fine if the result is fine. It's a habit. Habits wear grooves. The shoebox under my shirt itched my ribs. I'm going, I said. He stepped aside. Up the trap ladder, he said. Stay to the left in the hallway. The right side sags. He glanced down the corridor toward the auditorium, listening to something I couldn't hear. And don't come back, he added. They're taking down the beams next week. The room will be a hole. We'll find another room. You'll find another memory. I went. The trap ladder was where he said. The band hallway was as I remembered, lockers for instruments open like mouths with braces. The chain on the exit was looped, but not locked. I shouldered it aside and stepped into air that didn't smell like old breath. The night had that electric quiet that comes before storm. At the fence, I pulled the pushed-out panel back into place from the inside, because I know the men who'll be sent to fix it, and I don't need anyone's Saturday to be longer because I was sloppy. In the car, I put the shoebox on the passenger seat and just looked at it. The tape had yellowed. My strip of scotch, where I'd tried to hold a corner down in 8th grade, was still there, doing nothing. I peeled the tape and opened the lid. Our notes were inside, folded, scrawled in pencil and glitter pen. Future me, don't forget to be kind. Future me, get a dog. Mine said, in a blocky hand I'd practiced to look cool, don't be scared to leave. I laughed once, an ugly sound, and then I put the lid back on. The next morning, I drove past Ridgeview on my way to a service call. A white city truck was parked out front. Two men in vests were talking to a third who wore a cap pulled low, hands in his jacket, nodding. I didn't slow down. I didn't take a picture. I didn't roll the window down to smell the air. That night, when I was done with work and the house was quiet, I put the shoebox on the kitchen table and read the notes again. Nostalgia doesn't make rooms safer. It makes them prettier in your head. The auditorium had never been safe. Not for kids on ladders. Not for aging beams. Not for a person who wanted something the building couldn't give back. Sometimes I hear a cough in an empty room and wait for it to repeat. It doesn't. Echoes have rules, and so do people. That man will keep his notebooks until the day a wall falls where he stands, or his feet decide to move slower than the rope. I don't like it, but liking isn't required. The only thing I'm certain of is this. When rooms are about to die, everyone who loves them and everyone who uses them finds a reason to be there at the end. I kept one thing that wasn't mine. On the back of the Polaroid, someone, maybe me, maybe not, had scribbled in pencil the heart of the school. The graphite had smudged until the words were softer than they were written. I slipped the photo into a drawer. The rest went back in a box. I taped it shut and put it in the hall closet next to the winter boots. I don't plan to go back to Ridgeview before the excavators come. If I pass by after, I'll probably stop and look at the hole. People like to watch erasures, but I won't look for twine or notebooks. I won't cough to test the air. Some rooms you leave while they still know your name. Some rooms answer back in a voice that isn't yours, and you take the hint and go. I was halfway up the Ferris wheel when the drone appeared. It came in from the dark like a hornet, rotors whining, a cold blue light blinking under its body. It stopped 3 feet from my face and hovered there, lens staring dead into me. Then it tilted side to side like it was nodding, urging me higher. That was when I knew I wasn't alone in the park. I've done my share of dumb things for friends, but this one was pure peer pressure. 3 of us had been drinking around a fire in Evan's backyard when the topic of the old Lakeshore amusement park came up. It had been closed for years. Insurance problems, a kid falling from a coaster, the kind of rumors you hear when a place rots behind a fence. The ride still stood, rust creeping through the paint, weeds cracking the asphalt. Evan swore he'd climbed the Ferris wheel 2 summers ago and said the view was worth it. His girlfriend, Taylor, rolled her eyes and told me, he's too chicken to do it now. Bet you won't either. It was stupid, but I've never been great at backing down from a dare. I figured I'd go, get a phone picture from the top, and be back in my car before midnight. The park wasn't hard to get into. One section of fence near the lake had fallen flat under a tree branch. Inside, the air smelled like algae and metal. The carousel sat frozen mid-song, horses peeling into ghosts. The coaster's track vanished into shadow, and at the far end, the Ferris wheel loomed, still, skeletal, cabins swinging gently in the breeze. I started climbing from the lowest car, using the rusted crossbeams as a ladder. They flexed under my weight, but held. At 30 feet, I could see the lake beyond the fence, silver under the moon. That's when the drone showed up. At first I thought it belonged to one of my friends, some elaborate prank, but they weren't anywhere nearby. I'd left them at the fire miles away. The drone hovered close, its little camera trained on my face. Then it backed up a few feet, rose higher, and stopped again, waiting. I climbed. It climbed with me. Every time I paused to catch my breath, it swayed in the air like it was impatient. At one point, it zipped ahead to a car whose axle gleamed silver in my flashlight beam. That was strange. Every other joint on the wheel was orange with rust, but this one had been cleaned and oiled recently. I reached it and saw a coil of nylon rope tied around the beam, dangling down the wheel's side. The rope wasn't old. No fraying, no sun bleaching. Someone had been here not long ago. The drone dipped toward me, then back toward the rope like it was showing me something. I followed its lead, stepping over the rope and climbing another few feet. The wheel groaned with each move. The drone stayed just ahead of me, urging me toward the top. But the higher I got, the more I noticed other signs of recent activity. Handprints smudged into the dust on the cars, a water bottle wedged between beams, cigarette butts balanced on the metal supports. Whoever was coming here wasn't just passing through. They'd made this ride their spot. Halfway to the top, I looked down. The ground seemed impossibly far, the midway a patchwork of black and silver in the moonlight. My stomach dipped. That's when the drone pulled a new trick. It swooped forward, then swung back toward me fast, so close the rotor wash hit my face. Something thin and sharp hung from its body, like fishing line with a blade taped to it. The line whipped past my forearm and nicked my sleeve. It wasn't just filming me. It was trying to make me move. I scrambled upward, keeping the beam of my flashlight on the supports. The drone circled, then darted to a car near the very top. Its axle was oiled too. The rope tied there ran down toward the hub of the wheel, disappearing into the machinery. The car door was open. I hauled myself onto the frame beside it and peered inside. The bench seat was gone. In its place was a tripod with a mounted camera aimed at the horizon. A folding chair was wedged against the far side, and next to it sat a small cooler. Someone had been camping here, at the top of the Ferris wheel. Before I could process that, a voice drifted up from below. "Don't stop. Keep going." It was a man's voice, calm, almost bored. I scanned the ground but saw no one. The drone hovered above the car, lens fixed on me. I got the sudden, horrible impression that this wasn't random, that I was in someone's show. I climbed into the car. The chair was warm. The cooler held 2 bottles of water and a pack of jerky. The camera's memory light blinked red, recording. I stepped toward it, and the drone buzzed low, forcing me to duck. From below, the voice came again. "Look at the lens." I didn't. I grabbed the camera instead, yanked it off the tripod, and stuffed it into my jacket. The drone shot upward, spinning its rotors so loud they whined. Then the wheel moved. It was subtle at first, a slow shift under my feet. Then the whole structure groaned, and I felt the car swing forward a few inches. My stomach dropped. The drone zipped toward the hub, vanishing behind the beams. I realized someone was turning the wheel from below. The car began to descend, slowly at first, then picking up speed. The rope tied to the axle whipped and rattled, the oiled joints sliding smooth. Whoever was doing this knew exactly how much force the old motor could take. I crouched, gripping the frame. At about 30 feet from the ground, I jumped. The landing knocked the breath from me, but I stayed on my feet long enough to sprint for the midway. Behind me, the wheel creaked to a stop. The drone reappeared, darting after me at head height. I swung my flashlight at it, hitting the rotor. It veered off with a sickening wobble and crashed into the grass. I didn't stop to look at it. I ran for the fence, through the gap, and didn't slow until I was back at my car. Later, when I checked the camera I'd taken, I found dozens of videos. They were all the same. People, different people, climbing the Ferris wheel at night. Some made it to the top. Others froze halfway and climbed back down. Every clip ended the same way. Whoever was filming would zoom in on the person's face, hold it there for a few seconds, and then cut. There was no sign of the man's voice, no sign of who was running the drone. I didn't keep the camera. I left on the police station steps with no note. But every now and then, I check online for videos tagged with Lakeshore Park. And just once, I saw one that looked recent, grainy footage of someone climbing the Ferris wheel. The drone's blue light blinked just behind their head. I first heard the loom at 2:13 a.m. A slow, rhythmic clatter, metal striking metal, just beyond my bedroom wall. 3 beats, pause, 3 beats again. At first, I thought it was a neighbor's radiator kicking on. But in this building, there were no neighbors, not in the section where I lived. I'd taken the place because it was cheap, too cheap. The ad said, loft in historic mill, work in progress building, which meant half renovated, half abandoned. The management had only finished the west wing, and even then, only 4 units were actually livable. The rest were gutted rooms with bare brick walls and dust-covered beams. Mine was Unit 307, top floor, facing the river. The only other occupied unit was down the hall, rented by an older guy named Dennis who worked nights and kept to himself. The rest of the floor was locked off, or supposed to be. During the day, I could almost forget I was living in a construction ghost town. But at night, the silence was absolute until the loom started. The first time I heard it, I lay in bed listening, counting the beats. The sound was too regular for random construction noise, too crisp to be pipes. It reminded me of the old textile machines the building had housed decades ago, long gone now, according to the glossy brochure they'd handed me when I signed the lease. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped into the hall. The noise was louder here, coming from beyond a locked metal door halfway down. A faded sign above it read, "Authorized personnel only." I pressed my ear to the door. The loom kept going, clatter, pause, clatter. My hand found the knob. To my surprise, it turned easily. The air inside was cold and stale. My flashlight swept over a space that had been partially renovated. New drywall on one side, bare beams, and dust on the other. The sound echoed through the empty shell of the old weaving floor. I followed it past stacked lumber and abandoned scaffolding until I reached a partition of plywood. The loom sound was right behind it. A narrow gap between the boards revealed a sliver of light. Harsh, white, artificial. I peeked through. The loom wasn't a machine at all. It was a set of free weights on a steel rack, being lifted and dropped in precise intervals. A man, mid-30s, wiry, shaved head, was working out alone. Around him were makeshift bunk beds, plastic tubs stacked like drawers, and a small propane stove. A squat, hidden. I pulled back quietly, heart thumping. This wasn't just a random trespasser. The space was lived in. Whoever this was had turned part of the building into a home and a gym. I backed toward the hall, but my boot caught on something. A strip of cable running along the floor toward the plywood partition. My light followed it up to a mounted camera above the gap. The red light was on. I didn't wait. I slipped out the door, closed it, and hurried back to my unit. I locked my door, pulled the blinds, and lay on the bed, fully clothed, listening. The loom sound stopped. Silence. 10 minutes later, footsteps padded slowly down the hall. They stopped outside my door. A soft knock. 3 beats. Pause. 3 beats again. I didn't answer. In the morning, the hall looked normal. No one there. The metal door at the far end was locked again. I told myself I'd imagined most of it, that maybe Dennis had been in there. But that night, the loom started again, exactly at 2:13 a.m. This time, I didn't investigate. I'm not sure if it's better to let them think I don't know, or to let them know I do.